An ideal school would be one where the focus is on how do youngsters learn, how do we know they've learned, what are all the ways in which they demonstrate learning.
I went to Chipman through the years of 96 through 2000. I really deeply loved going to school at that time. My whole approach, I think, on life came from Chipman. Chipman was pretty much my best years to date.
You guys found a way to teach us certain life skills and stuff that brought us all together to respect the different people that we were.
I just remember entering middle school and all of a sudden I loved learning.
We've been basing a lot of our teaching here at the school for a while on the brain research and what the research has been teaching us for the last 20 years about the way that all people, but especially children, learn. And one of the really important pieces of information to come out of that is the importance of real life experiences. And you don't always get real life experiences in a classroom. You need to take students out of a classroom and bring them out into the world. And we call them being there experiences at this school. They're different than the field trips that people used to take because they're really based on curriculum. They're the foundation for learning important conceptual information that we're teaching in our classrooms. And it gives all children the opportunity to have a real experience, create the hooks for learning that they need, and be able to really integrate the concepts that are part of these experiences into their life.
Here's the gift. Here's the gift. Children want to learn, but about real things. About real things.
Emotions drive intelligence. When you're excited about the learning, you learn. When you're excited about the subject, you're going to learn. When kids are emotionally engaged, they learn.
I mean, I want to differentiate gifted and nice average kids. Gifted in terms of prodigies, we have a few. Most of them are gifted by their environment. When you can afford that they can have ski lessons, they can have piano lessons, that they can join the soccer club, that they go on vacations with their parents, all those are being their experiences that allows them to have this mindset of the connections and the way the world goes. Everything about the brain is about connection.
We got to experience all of these different things that we would have never experienced.
We'd go on these camping trips, though. Like, everybody, all of the kids in the program and a bunch of the parents and all of the teachers would go on this big camping trip.
When I think about the things that we exposed kids to, it wasn't just camping, it was outdoor education. And it wasn't just overnight, it was 5 days and 4 nights. And it wasn't just once a year to build community at the beginning of the year, it was twice a year. And the fact that, what did we see, like Phantom of the Opera, we went out on the bay and we studied brackish water. And
we weren't doing worksheets, we were actually doing all these like incredible real life experiments and activities and things that just made what I was learning actually relevant to my life, and that sticks with you.
One thing I learned is, as a parent, is to try to expose my child to different things. And that's what I think Chipman gave me, was the understanding to give my child the opportunities that are limitless in the world.
I said if I could do any part of life over, it would be middle school. But I loved my whole middle school experience.
When we were at Chipman, it was fun to be at school. We actually liked to go to school every day. We wanted to be there no matter what.
When a kid can say their best time in their life was their middle school, it's pretty impressive.
As of this hour, America's schools will be on a new path of reform and a new path of results.
No Child Left Behind came on the scene. It came out of Texas, which never impressed me as a place that was doing well. But George Bush, and with Democratic and Republican support, worried about American schooling. They saw America failing. Now, they misread the tests, they misread our place, they misread how our schools were doing. But let's assume they were good-hearted, but they put into place a program guaranteed to fail. And we knew it had to fail because there is a social science law that people didn't pay any attention to. The law was called Campbell's Law, and it stated very simply, any time some metric you're using takes on too much value, it gets corrupted.
SAT scores is a perfect case in point. The minute you say that you're going to assess student intelligence in terms of SAT scores, then a whole industry develops around boosting student performance at taking the SAT test. So you end up testing the student's ability to take the SAT test instead of intelligence, which is what you're trying to measure after all.
One of the tragedies of the school reform movement in the United States is that it has been so organized around high-stakes tests. We have guided most of the reform movement based on the results of these very low-quality tests that measure a tiny fraction of what really matters and drive instruction away from the most important kinds of learning.
Teachers look at a variety of factors when they are assessing a child, when they're putting a score on a report card. I mean, as a teacher, I would never just take formal tests and find the mean and make that their grade. I mean, there's so much more involved in a grade.
Learning becomes finding one answer out of 5 that are provided for you in a very superficial way on a very superficial question. Send them back out for machines to score and then post the numbers. The data is reduced to a 2-digit or a 3-digit number. That tells you very little about student learning. It tells you very little about what kids can do in the real world.
We assume that there's one answer and there's one way to arrive at that answer. And that's how we teach them, and that's how we test them, as if there is only one answer, because that's all we ever ask for, that's all we ever assess, and we draw our conclusions based on that one answer. And we say there's one way to get there. And when students don't get it, we say they haven't learned. But there are a lot of ways to solve problems.
You have the kids who think deeper than a multiple choice test and can see how it could be A and C.
Now they begin focused on, how do I respond to test items in this way? And they begin to restrict their thinking. And over the long period from K through 12, when kids learn to restrict their thinking, suddenly you have kids who can't think well, because now they cannot think outside of certain types of frameworks that we say are important, but they're only important in school. In real life, that's not how we operate. And these kids will be at a tremendous disadvantage if their whole world is based on what are the right answers.
I understand taking tests aren't fun. Too bad. We need to know in America. We need to know whether or not children have got the basic education.
Now, I believe in accountability. I believe in assessment. The problem is, we are preparing kids for multiple choice factual recall tests that tell us absolutely nothing about college, career, or citizenship readiness in the 21st century. Test prep has become the dominant curriculum in both public and in many of our independent schools with the advanced placement program. So I think the problem is today that what gets tested is all that gets taught. We're squeezing the life out of the curriculum. We're squeezing the arts out of the curriculum. We're squeezing curiosity out of the curriculum, all in the name of improving test scores that are virtually meaningless as predictors of adult success or well-being.
I think the whole testing juggernaut has really made life difficult for some wonderful programs from coast to coast. A lot of wonderful programs that have tried to reach the whole children, that want to have rigorous content, that want to have innovative pedagogy, that want all kids to succeed. They will get pushed out, or their time will be reduced. There'll be time on prepping for tests. And scores on tests, the way they go up and down, are no reflection on sustainable competencies that last over time.
So the thing about, so Chipman, I mean, I think the thing that shifted was, you know, the high stakes testing piece came in.
You know, when the state came in and evaluated our program, and we had numerous people come in and tell us what we were doing wrong. And
sadly, nobody came in and said, you know, oh, we're really concerned you don't have kids who know how to think. You know, the only thing they were concerned about was reading on a standardized test and math on a standardized test.
It really just became about the number. What's our API? Did it go up? Did it go down? What's our target? You know, we have 2 years, or they're gonna, you know, take us down in a sense. That kind of external pressure was very powerful, and it did make us change the way that we were teaching.
The school has restructured. The school has completely, in my opinion, bowed to those pressures, and I don't know that they have much choice. I mean, this is the mandates come down from on high. Those mandates are attached to both money in terms of incentive, but also there are disincentives, there are punishments that happen, there are consequences for administrators, for teachers who do not teach to standards, who do not perform well on tests.
I've been teaching for 18 years now. When I started, we had some testing, but it wasn't the high-stakes testing that we have now. So there was a lot more freedom to really choose what I felt was best for kids. And as a professional, that was really important to me. I wanted to be able to make those choices. I'd been trained in it. I was seeing the effects in the classroom, and I wanted to have the opportunity to really exercise that. Over time, we've had this high-stakes testing come in, and it's really eliminated a lot of the things that I felt are important to kids.
It's taken away the joy and the art of teaching. We've had such creative teachers, this most wonderful teachers at this school, who made learning magic, because our kids here in this particular school come from a huge variety of life situations. So teachers here are here because they love kids and are trying to make education accessible to these kids in a variety of ways. And we've had huge outdoor education programs here, which are no longer.
The structure of the school had to change to accommodate making sure we taught the standards in the way that they're tested, so it limits our ability to take some of these being their trips. And I've seen, especially this year, we've taken much fewer than we ever have before, and the quality of my teaching has really suffered, and I feel like what my students have been able to learn has really suffered because of that.
We're on some awful part of that pendulum that we talk about in education, and it's not a very good part of that swing. We've lost so much.
One of the tragedies of American school reform theory is the idea that we don't address poverty or the needs of children or communities. We don't address the inequities in school funding. And then when the children score poorly on tests, we say, well, it must be bad teachers. So we have now a theory that we should fire the teachers, fire the principal, and we blow up the schools, close them down, and then reopen a new school, sometimes a charter. And what we're finding is that the new schools, unless they cream and crop and fail to serve many of the children with the highest needs in those communities, also are found to be failing in a few years, and we have some communities where we're now blowing up the second or third round of schools in those communities, closing them down and starting a new school, without actually ever dealing with the fundamental needs of children and families.
What's behind this that's so crazy is the idea is that the school is a toxic environment. It's the school that's failing, when in fact the school has low scores because the kids have high needs.
Chipman number one, what? Chipman, what? I said Chipman number one, what? Chipman, I said now Chipman number one, what? Chipman, I said now Chipman number one, what? Yeah.
There's a few entrances to Alameda. One of them is a tunnel that goes directly into downtown Oakland. I had a perception of we were the poor school. Lincoln was kind of the rich kids' school. It was on the other side of town. People had a lot more wealth in that neighborhood.
A lot of us lived on the west end of Alameda. Some of us even lived in Oakland, and so coming from those low-income neighborhoods where the parents are either working nonstop to pay the bills, or a large percent of the parents probably grew up the same way and they weren't really involved with their children's education. So I feel like the programs that you guys created was sort of like a lifeline for a lot of us. For me, my home life during those years, that was probably the worst. But it's so crazy that I can still say that those were some of the best years of my life, and it's because of what was going on at Chipman.
Middle school is so hard, and I really believe during that time we created this cocoon where we taught kids how to treat each other. And we didn't just say be nice, we taught what happens to the brain when you're put down.
Teaching the kids about having a safe environment, teaching the kids about how their brain was functioning and how they learned best was awesome, especially because I was working with kids who had special needs.
There was something called the brain compatible elements. One of them was absence of threat. That in order for an organism to do anything beyond just survival mode, you had to feel safe. And that was one of our reasons for the community circle, and a lot of the relationship building that we did was to establish that culture of security, where you didn't have to worry so much about your physical or emotional safety. You could concentrate on your schoolwork.
I felt a level of trust that allowed me to go further with my learning, allowed me to be wrong, to ask questions, to not know the answer to things, to kind of push myself because I knew that I wouldn't get made fun of, I would be supported. You know, you're supported by everyone, not just your friends.
When students begin asking lots of questions and have discussions about those questions, that means you have an environment where they can ask those questions, get those questions discussed and answered. That's when you develop higher order thinking. Can that be quantified? No, it can't.
That process of building community is essential.
It was something that was just part of the culture of let's be kind to each other, let's create a supportive learning environment that I really appreciate. As a preschool teacher, that creating a safe space is a big deal as well, because you have these very young children who a lot of times it's their first time being away from their parents, it's their first time being in this big group of other children, and we want them to have fun and to have them learn through exploration and fun and not have it be this big scary experience. And when they're able to feel like they have teachers that they can trust and they're in a space where it's okay to talk and to be themselves, that's when I think the richness really comes out.
We have to take time to deal with the humanity of that child before we can even start diagnosing and prescribing for content or skill. We have to diagnose and prescribe for emotional stability. People don't know what teachers do.
It's not just about their cognitive development. So much else happens for kids in those 3 years that has a tremendous effect on what their cognitive development is going to be as they progress. And with all this focus on just the cognitive development of these kids and what is their test score, how are they doing, we lose sight of the fact that all that other stuff happens, and it's equally as important.
But let me tell you something. In Asia today, they don't care about children's self-esteem. They care about whether they learn math, whether they can read in English, whether they understand why science is important, whether they have the grit and determination to be successful. You tell me which society is going to be the winner in this 21st century, the one that worries about how we feel, or the one that worries about making sure the next generation has the capacity to eat everybody's lunch?
I travel all over the world, and the single most depressing thing that I've discovered in education in the last few years is there's only one goal in education all over the world now, and that's to improve your country's relative standing on the TIMSS test or the PISA test, the two major comparison tests.
Well, the earliest standardized test would have been IQ test in the early part of the 20th century. And the IQ tests were originally used to sort people for the Army in World War I. There were Americans who quickly saw the possibilities here for sorting children very quickly and being able to help school administrators by saying, this child has potential, this child has none. So it was a sorting device.
People like Goddard and Terman and Robert Yerkes, these are key architects of the IQ testing movement. All of them had very hereditarian, deterministic, and eugenic notions of intelligence. Eugenics is one of those forgotten histories in the history of this country. And it was about understanding and seeing people as inferior or superior. Eugenics had an effect on education, on schooling. It played a role in how people understood the intellectual potential of different individuals and groups of kids. Superintendents who took these tests and used them in the districts might not have thought that they were using a eugenic instrument, but they certainly thought that they had found an instrument that would solve their problems in an efficient way, that they had these diverse students from these different ethnic backgrounds, this growing population, and now they could find a way to efficiently place a student in a learning track. You see at this time in American school history what we call ability grouping, or the emergence of tracking, and it's coincidental with IQ testing. And that's coincidental with the whole ideology of you have a fixed intelligence, this is where you are, and you're going to stay like that.
The general view of intelligence is that we all have a certain amount, which probably comes from our biological parents, and there isn't much you can do to change it. And from a long time historically, the way schools were set up, the idea was to figure out who was smart and deliver it to those people who would become the elite, and it didn't really matter about anybody else. And I think that way of thinking is still pretty pervasive everywhere. I'm a psychologist, and I developed the notion that we don't just have a single general intelligence, but rather a number of separate intelligences, which are called the multiple intelligences. And most of school and most of testing relies very heavily on two kinds of intelligence: linguistic, reading, talking, and logical mathematical, being mathematical or scientific. And there's no question if you have a combination of language and logic, that's going to serve you very well in going to school, because school is kind of delivered that way. And certainly it's going to be of great help if you have a short answer standardized test, because those are really blends of language and logic in most cases.
So rather than looking at how kids learn, different ways you can assess a student, different kinds of intelligences kids have, in fact, you're having almost a throwback to the idea that you can learn everything you need to learn about a student during a short period of time. And those kinds of tests then, the kind of tests today, only capture certain kinds of learning, but yet they're making very, very important decisions about that student's life.
Well, the area, Lower Merion Township is located just outside of Philadelphia, and it's a fairly affluent area for the most part. We also usually rank number 1, 2, or 3 top school districts in the state. And I really felt that we were getting as good, if not a better education than you would in a private school. The school district itself, I love. What's happening, unfortunately, is the state is really getting involved with the education, and the kids are really just getting over-tested. They made passing the Keystone tests mandatory to graduate high school.
In this school district, where children have all the resources money can buy, there are some children who, because they just don't test well, can't pass the Keystones. And so they are facing the traumatic realization that unless, there's a waiver for them, they can't graduate.
I mean, these tests are extremely difficult. And if we're having these kind of problems in, the number 2, 3 school district in the state, I mean, I can't even imagine how it's affecting, the cities that are struggling.
And I can remember when we did get to high school, and there was so much pressure about this exit exam. Like, you have to pass the exit exam. And so it was almost like they didn't care about the individual student as a person, what that individual student has accomplished up until this point. They don't care about the awesome projects that we have done. So it's almost like to tell somebody, if you don't pass this one test, the last 12, 13 years of your life doesn't matter. When we did take the test and a large majority of the students did not pass it, then they put the pressure on even more. And it was like, stick your head in this book. The people at the top are putting pressure on the teachers, so the teachers are putting pressure on the students. We lost that dynamic that we did get from middle school, from the programs that you were doing. So now you have these students with the parents who were already not involved having so much pressure put on them, and it's like, where do you turn? The teachers are already stressed out because so much pressure being put on them that people just started to just withdraw.
A lot of very promising kids are being pushed out of school without a diploma. That is the #1 most obvious and pernicious result of this infatuation with so-called higher standards. Not only are you actually lowering standards, but you're lowering the boom on these, on who knows how many kids. We may lose half a generation to this nonsense.
Well, it's a very simple correlation that the kids who have the most advantages have the highest test scores, and the kids with the least have the lowest test scores.
If you tell me for a given school how many kids are on free or reduced lunch, how many kids have 2 parents at home, what kind of cars they drive, if they drive, and so on, I can predict with chilling accuracy what the average test score is going to be.
If we know that family income is driving the test scores, these are not tests of intelligence. And if we say race and socioeconomic status impact the test scores, then maybe these aren't tests of intelligence. These are tests of other factors that we don't wish to acknowledge.
In the 50th year of Brown versus the Board of Education, it is tragic, but we still have segregation. The segregation is that our poorer schools with higher need get less, and they're expected to perform at the same level with less resources going in. If you truly want No Child Left Behind, then there has to be equity.
We have actually one of the most inequitable school systems in the world, certainly in the industrialized world. We have wide disparities in the funding that goes to schools. And so we have schools that are outfitted like the Taj Mahal in some wealthy suburbs. And then we have schools that lack paper and books, have crumbling facilities, have no art or music or libraries. Dreadful conditions, third world conditions in many of our schools. And then we have an accountability system that says everybody reach the same goals, despite those profound inequalities.
Instead of blaming teachers and administrators and curriculum, why don't we look poverty in the eye and say that's the major problem for America? And if you need any more proof of that, all you have to do is look at the international tests.
The PISA test is an international test where results of natural science, mathematics, and literacy is compared between different countries. What I think is frightening is that the politicians, of course, they look at the tests and the result will shape their view of education. And that's the only thing that they focus on.
You know, obviously where the competition is now, it's not in our districts or in our states. Our competition is not even just in the country. It's India and South Korea and China and Singapore, and that's what we have to be preparing our students for.
The first thing to understand about high-achieving countries is that they have very little child poverty.
Finland has 4% or so of its kids in poverty. We have 24% or so of our kids in poverty. If you adjust, here's Finland on the international test, here's the US on the international test. If you run a statistical equation in which you give Finland our rate of poverty, and you take for the US Finland's rate of poverty, the scores go just like this.
Our schools, which have fewer than 10% of children in poverty, are #1 in the world. And the other countries we're being compared to have all of their schools with less than 10% of children in poverty. Even our schools with as many as 25% of children in poverty, which is by international standards extraordinarily high rates of poverty, ranked #3 in the world. Even our schools with as many as 50% of children in poverty rank above international averages in reading. But we have a growing number of schools where more than 75% of children live in poverty. 1 in 5 schools in our country now has 75% or more of its children living in poverty. That is an international horror. No one in other countries can even imagine how a country could allow that to be the case.
It's really interesting having 2 kids who got to go through
3 years.
the beautiful Chipman.
Yes.
And one who got to go through the status quo. Very, very different experiences. I see of my 2 older girls far more of the influence of Chipman in their lives today than I see with Jules.
Yeah.
I remember visiting classrooms because my mom worked there. It really seemed like classes where like the kids really liked each other and got along. I remember like academic rallies, hearing about those. It just being really like a celebration of like kids' academic success, and that was really great to hear about. Although I was a bit envious when I was there, and it was not so much like that. Yeah.
Oh man, that meant everything. Again, I really excelled when I went to Chipman. I really put forth my biggest effort. That taught me to give me that drive. I remember the first rally I went to, and I wasn't a part of it. It made me want to be a part of it. And then when I crossed the threshold and I got my 3.0, I was like, oh man, that's amazing. And then I seen people getting 0.5 growth, and it's like 0.5, but it made me feel that much better. So I got the 0.5 and I had the 3.5, and it just kept growing, and I always felt better and better, and I always pushed my fellow peers to, try to put more effort in as well, because we were all in it together. We felt like it,
I was jealous of my sisters. They got to go on like the cool outdoor ed trips and do community circles and all that stuff that I guess I just kind of like missed out on.
We were an underperforming school at the time, so we were under a lot of pressure to raise those test scores. So that became the focus of our work. Now, we tried to keep a lot of the affective stuff going because we knew that was valuable, but as a whole site, that idea was beginning to be lost. Our attention was being directed elsewhere.
We always, at Chipman, sought out professional development. If we saw a problem with our kids, how can we fix it? And so all the experts were telling us that doing this reading was going to change their lives. And so I feel like we were sort of sold a bill of goods because nobody had really tried it. I mean, you look at the research studies, they did it in these ivory towers where they had extra support that you don't have in a real school. So if a kid wasn't making, so their gains were not realistic. But because we believed that we needed to do what was best for our kids, and the experts told us this is what you have to do, we did it.
cause for celebration. First Lady Laura Bush saluting the teachers and students at Chipman Middle School in Alameda.
What word? Experience. Next sound. Read. What word? Reward.
What we've just done is we've taken everything we know and we've distilled it down into these little tiny chunks of performance or achievement that we know are not even going to motivate kids to even want to be there anymore. So we've taken all of that intrinsic motivation that was built into the program because it was exciting and fun and kids got to talk to each other and they got to learn and they got to try new things and we've taken all that away.
If I look at going all over the state, we did the best implementation I've seen of a 3-tier intervention.
Absolutely.
So we actually did what they said to do, but at what cost? And what did we let go of?
That's the thing. It shouldn't be either or. We should have been able to give those kids that reading instruction and give everybody this phenomenally rich, creative environment. And when people say money doesn't solve the problem, bullshit. You give me a school full of phenomenal teachers and amazing leadership and a shitload of money, and we are going to, I do believe we could solve that problem.
Don't you think on some level, I mean, we all sold out, that we knew, and I really feel like I own this, that we knew what was right for kids, and we were told, now you have to do this, and we went, I went, okay, you're telling me what to do.
I have great remorse about decisions that were made. I don't feel that it was selling out. I feel like I was duped. I think maybe I was more trusting of what might be coming down from a larger level. And so, when we started to make the changes at Chipman that started to dismantle anything that was good and beautiful and taught children how to think and learn and be independent, that they knew what it was that we needed to do. It was, I had faith that they knew something that we didn't know.
The frightening thing is the wrong people are making decisions for education. I don't want governors. I don't want senators. I don't want business people. The people who should be talking about education are teachers.
We know what to do. The educators, the scientists, the researchers, the ones who have studied the brain and how kids learn, the ones who have studied behaviors, we all know what to do. The politicians get to make the call and they don't pay any attention to what we know.
There are a certain segment of people who gain positions of power are making war on the youth of this country. This group of privileged adults, that's who's writing policy that is causing chaos and further traumatizing kids and their families. Because they don't know how school works.
So now the people thought, oh, wait a minute, there's lots of money here.
The movement for corporate education reform has really taken off in the last 10 years or so. And there's several different facets to it. Probably the strongest entity advancing it is the Gates Foundation, simply because they have invested the most in this area and they have the most.
You mean Bill Gates? The man never went to a public school, never taught a day in his life, never doesn't send his kids to public school, and only gives money to influence policy. Almost all of it negative.
The Gates Foundation has spent hundreds of millions of dollars promoting a very specific agenda around education reform.
And so much of American education policy is run by folks like the Gates Foundation and the Broad Foundation and the Walton Foundation.
These philanthropists, they have their pet projects. Now, Bill Gates is the big name in pushing Common Core. Got the Walton family, they're big into charters and vouchers and school choice. So they direct a lot of their money there. You've got the Broad Foundation, really big into Teach for America. And so they direct a lot of their money there. So these different philanthropists, they must be bored, and they just figure that American education is a nice place to go out and kick around the dirt a little bit.
This group that is now called the Reform Movement, I think their goal is to privatize public education. It means that the schools are run by private boards. They're run by corporations. They're chain schools, just like chain stores.
A lot of people began to realize that they could take off with a privatization movement if they continued the attack on public schools that started 30 years ago with A Nation at Risk.
The report states bluntly that the very future of our nation is at risk, sabotaged by a rising tide of mediocrity in our children's education.
Then Joel Klein and Condoleezza Rice came out with a report saying we're losing the race now to China and Brazil and India. Again, it's absolute nonsense. These people want to find an enemy, make us look bad, and then privatize the schools. That's always the solution. Scare the American people and figure out how much money you can pull out of them. And that's what we're seeing in America right now.
Here's the problem. Business leaders have a theory of change based on their experience in business. They believe in free markets. They see public education as a monopoly. So they assume that if they create market-based competition with charter schools, then voila, we will get better schools. Problem is, it doesn't work that way.
When Katrina hit, lots of people left. They came back in. The public schools were gone. They were gone. They have privatized and voucherized and charterized everything in New Orleans. There's hardly any public schools there.
Privatizers wanted to take over New Orleans. I mean, that's the bottom line. When Katrina hit, that was their real opportunity. Naomi Klein writes about the shock doctrine, how the best time to effect reform is to sweep in when there's a disaster of some sort and just take over, and that's exactly what happened.
The idea of the recovery school district was that you would take over the school, in a few years you would turn it around and hand it back to the school district, which was a great idea. That's never happened. Not one has been turned back. They all get chartered.
After Hurricane Katrina, our public school system changed drastically. We were no longer entitled to neighborhood schools. We were told that there was this thing called school choice. You could choose any school, but it wasn't really choice. You had the option of choosing any school, but you may not actually get your choice. Most of the schools became charter schools, so that's not really much of a choice if you don't want to choose a charter school.
The charter movement, which started, I think, with very high aspirations, and there were some good charters, but increasingly it's been taken over by aggressive and entrepreneurial charter entrepreneurs who see privatization as some kind of a solution.
And one of the problems with the charter school expansion is that the people that wrote the laws have sought to encourage the charter expansion by building in advantages to people who want to do real estate deals. And there's very little oversight for this sort of thing because they insist that they're private entities. You know, 10 years ago, charter schools were looked at as sort of these little hothouses of innovation, but the charter schools have sort of taken on a different character now, where they're really displacing neighborhood schools, and yet they're not accepting all of the students.
Now, reformers are quick to say, you know, you just don't want to admit the schools are failing. These schools have problems. Well, sure, schools do have problems. They serve the general public, which is a really amazing accomplishment. We take everyone.
In some cases with charter schools is they cream off the students that are the least expensive to educate. And so we call that cream skimming, because if you're taking the kids that have the better test scores, that are not special ed, that are not ELLs, and you do or do not designate them as gifted and talented, that's essentially cream skimming.
We're getting to the point where significant amounts of money are transferred from the public schools into the charter schools. And when the students leave, they take their funding with them. And if the ones that stay behind are the ones that are the most expensive to educate, so you end up creating a whole tract education system.
Don't buy into this because it's all smoke and mirrors. There's no miracle here.
One of the most destructive effects of our current accountability system, I think, is what it's doing to the profession of teaching and to teachers' morale. Teaching is becoming entirely focused on improving test scores. In fact, teachers' jobs demand that they do that. And if they don't, they're going to lose their job.
The central tenet, the central thread of corporate reformers is to oppose teacher due process. They support deprofessionalizing teaching. In other words, organizations like Teach for America that bring teachers in and turn them over at a high rate.
Teach for America is a program that seeks to take recent college graduates and place them in urban and rural schools across the United States for a 2-year commitment. Their salary is often $20,000 lower than the average teacher. So if you're a superintendent and you have 170 teachers delivered to you at $20,000 below what it would have cost you, what are you going to do as a superintendent? Regardless of the consequences of those teachers in terms of student learning, because they're trying to meet their bottom line. And so that's a part and parcel of the broader issue with charters. Charters, they see it as a way to save money. Teach for America, this is a way to save money. How can we do school reform cheap for poor kids?
You won't see this going on at Sidwell Friends or Exeter.
The people who are creating our schools, they're not creating these schools in the images of the best schools they attended. They're creating these schools for other people's children.
One of the interesting things about the reformers, and I really hate that word because it comes with such a nice positive connotation, the market model folks. They have this odd notion of how the market works. I mean, they believe if they're going to hold teachers accountable as if they're sort of lazy lugs, and they're going to get fired if they don't get their test scores up, and schools are going to get shut down, or they're going to get turned around. They'll improve because they're competing with charter schools. The teaching corps will be a whole lot better if you bring in a bunch of Teach for America folks. And there's no evidence that any of that works.
This is a movement that is cloaked in deception. And so they use deceptive language, and they say, we're doing it for the children. This is all about kids first. This is all about students first. We're doing it for the children. We're doing it to save children from failing schools. And when they say that they're fighting for the civil rights issue of our time, that's part of the deception. So we have this great hoax that's being perpetrated on the American public, and people just don't get it.
A race to the top in America's public schools. We are letting states and school districts compete for it. A few key benchmarks for reform. We will reward states that come together and adopt a common set of standards and assessments.
And there's this last year, if anything was notable, it was the furor over the Common Core. On the 24 people that were writing the standards, there were more than half of them were from testing companies, and there were no teachers involved.
Bill Gates really wants the Common Core. The last I stopped counting, it was at 173.5 million that I had counted. As far as his spending on Common Core. You've got Arnie Duncan saying it's not federal, but pushing it as though it's his own child.
The flaws in No Child Left Behind that were identified by the people who created Common Core were that different states had different standards, and so as a result, there wasn't a common bar. And so the solution to that was to create a national set of standards and a national test so that we can compare every state to every other state. Well, that misses the fundamental problem with No Child Left Behind, which really was not the fact that different states had different standards. The real problem with No Child Left Behind was that it required schools to focus very narrowly on test scores. Well, Common Core does not address that. It assumes that we're still going to remain single-mindedly focused on test scores.
It's a really interesting moment to see playing out because the Common Core, as a set of standards, the Common Core is a lot better than what most states have. As a set of exams, the fear is that, everything is being tested from every moment. We're going to look back fondly on No Child Left Behind, which is just one test a year in reading and math. If everything is going to be tested and tested from pre-K on, we are really living in a nightmarish universe. We're a very impatient society, and we're really impatient in school. So somebody comes along, it's the snake oil salesman. He's got a product to sell, and people think this is a cool idea. So it's program, program, program. They come, they go. The superintendents come, they go. The teachers get worn down. Nothing much happens in the school. And improvement doesn't happen, and then people start blaming the system for failing. So it's not as though the reformers, at least many of the reformers, don't have good hearts. They just have misdiagnosed the problem and screwed up whatever the solution would be.
Like half the battle is getting kids excited to go to school and like wanting to go to school. And you get them, what seemed like kind of tradition at Chipman kind of just went away.
It was sad. We knew it was coming to an end. We were holding on as much as we could to the things that we valued, but the structure. And that structure was kind of the last thing to go. Once that structure of a team of 6 teachers or so started to get broken up, then we started to lose a lot of what made the school special. The school itself is in the poor end of town. I know that's what happens to those schools, especially in this age of if you don't measure up, then you go charter or you reconstitute. And so that seemed a very natural progression for Chipman in terms of the way things were going as the country as a whole.
It was almost like the reason why Chipman was closing was sort of off to the side a little bit, and it was like, we're gonna do this exciting thing where we're gonna be able to continue this stuff instead of them closing us down. And so since nobody wanted it to close down, and they were gonna take a lot of the stuff that they knew worked, that had been kind of pushed to the side in the face of all the testing, and bring that back with the charter. So I had a lot of hope for what that would look like.
I was very sad to watch that close, and I was upset because we set ourselves up for something bad in the future. And we're displacing families, we're displacing kids, and then it's gonna bite us in the butt later.
It wasn't even called Chipman anymore. It's lost its name. It did not have that identity anymore.
It's gone.
It's gone. The building is there, that's about it.
I didn't feel like the charter was really, truly followed.
My biggest regret in my life is what now exists in place of Chipman, because it is not better than what Chipman was. It is not better. And that school closed for one reason, because of standardized tests. That's the only reason Chipman is not here today. I would be on a shadow of a doubt, I was gonna have this amazing place for my child to go. And my son just left 8th grade, and I have to say, middle school for my son, everything I never wanted for anybody's child. No sense of community, no sense of belonging to something bigger, no love of learning. And how can that be today in this community with everything we've done and everything we know? I mean, if I could take it all back, I'm just devastated by the last 3 years of what he's had. And what we were doing was not fancy. It wasn't expensive. It didn't require technology. It was just simple, good people who loved children, working hard together and taking care of them.
We actually know how to do school reform. We do. All you have to do is look on the other side of the tracks, the other side of the highway, the other side of the river. You do not have to go to Finland to see successful school reform. If you want to see what wealthy people do for their children, you see the arts, you see teachers who are highly certified, you see beautiful schools, schools that kids want to go to. The reason why we have failed at school reform is because we're trying to do school reform cheap for poor kids.
We know enough now that kids learn in a variety of ways. We know enough now that you need a variety of assessment tools to capture that kind of learning. And we know enough now that you have to liberate teachers in order for them to be creative with kids. It doesn't mean you can't have standards. It doesn't mean you can't have some standardized testing. But it does mean you have to kind of keep your eyes on the prize. And the prize is to kind of nurture wonderful, creative, thinking kids from a variety of backgrounds. And how to make that happen is not easy. Education's a messy business. I think this idea that we can run schools like businesses is a dangerous idea. And schools aren't businesses. And kids aren't items on an assembly line. And once people understand that, I think there'll be a greater appreciation and respect for what it takes to nurture a whole child from kindergarten through the 12th grade.
What do you want? You want kids to be pushed, challenged, work hard, be excited by what they're doing. You want them to be good citizens. You want them to be caring human beings. You want them to have a sense that they're not stupid. They actually have potential. You want them to have a sense that somebody has their back. If they work hard, then they're going to get as much support as they need. Punishment is not the first instinct. In that environment, most kids are going to flourish, and most teachers are going to flourish.
Chipman was this turning point where I became a learner, and I became confident in being a learner. I see that as such an important part of my entire school career because I went into high school with that attitude, and that enabled me to do well in high school and then to do well in college. That is why I want to be a teacher. If I can reach one kid in that way, that is absolutely something I could dedicate my entire life to.
Instead of it being something we went through, it's something that we carry with us forever.
I couldn't describe where I would be without Chipman.
Felt like at Chipman, you guys were preparing us to almost like take on the world, so to speak. Without Chipman, a lot of people would have just been completely passive. And I feel like a lot of us are not like that. We were definitely taught to speak our mind and stand up for what we believe in. Take initiative. If you see something that you feel like you can make better, then go ahead and do that.
I think it's hugely important that people realize we have to take an aggressive posture towards corporate reform. We have to defend public institutions from the attempt to take them over. Public education could go away in our generation.
And if you lose public schooling, you lose something very, very precious. The democracy is endangered when you lose the public schooling.
It's a classic political science dictum, which is a concentrated minority beats a diffuse majority every time. So who's our concentrated minority? We've been talking about them. They're the foundations, they're the business types, and they are some people of the school that really believe that No Child Left Behind is how you close the gap. And on the other side, you got lots of parents and lots of teachers and, all the folks that keep asking me, how do I get involved? Well, getting involved at this moment, whether it's the local level or the state level or federal, that's just crucial.
The opting out is important because what it's saying is this whole privatization movement is based on the testing. They're using the test scores as a club to beat the public schools up.
You got to deny them the measurement. Stop the data train. By any means necessary.
Well, I've seen a lot of wonderful parent activism, teacher activism, student activism, and I think that any one of these could be a source for bringing all of this to a grinding halt. And as the public begins to understand what's going on, I think that they're going to defend their public schools.
1, 2, 1, 2, 3. Papa's always home now. Papa's always home now. Never see mama with no frown. Never see mama with no frown. In and out of lockdown. In and out of lockdown. Brother and sister putting it down. Brother and sister putting it down. And we're rolling, 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 rolling. And we're rolling through these good times. Rolling through these good times. And we're rolling, 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 rolling. And we're rolling through these good times. Rolling through these good times. Me and little sister waiting here. Me and little sister waiting here. Waiting for them to come near. Waiting for them to come near. Just gotta climb that big, big wall. Just gotta climb that big, big wall. We'll be there to catch our fall. We'll be there to catch our fall. And we're rolling, rolling, still rolling, still rolling. And we're rolling through these good times. Rolling through these good times. Say we're rolling, rolling, still rolling, still rolling. And we're rolling through these good times. Rolling through these good times. Now we're all together. Now we're all together. Don't matter about the weather. Don't matter about the weather. That don't matter anyway. That don't matter anyway. We'll be together till our judgment day. We'll be together till our judgment day. And we're rolling, rolling, still rolling, still rolling. And we're rolling through these good times. Rolling through these good times. We're rolling, rolling, still rolling, still rolling. And we're rolling through these good times. Rolling through these good times. Rolling, 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 rolling. Say we're rolling through these good times. Rolling through these good times. Rolling, 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 rolling. Say we're rolling through these good times. Rolling through these good times. Shining. Chipman.